Some voices don't fade away. They get trapped in time, echoing on frequencies that no one can tune into anymore. It was 1942. The skies over the Pacific were boiling with aircraft, fear, and silence. Amidst the chaos of war, a pilot from the Royal Australian Air Force makes one final contact with base. The message is short, far too calm for someone who knows they might not return. "Good day, mate, I'm still here." Seconds later, the radar loses the signal. No wreckage, no body, no distress call, just a voice, suspended in the air above the Coral Sea. In this video, you're going to discover who this pilot was, what really happened on that mission, and why, more than 80 years later, no one can fully explain his disappearance. This isn't just a war story. It's a story about the last recorded proof of a man's existence. In war, the sky isn't freedom, it's an invisible abyss. May 1942. The Coral Sea, stretching between Australia and New Guinea, was becoming one of the most strategic points of the Second World War. The Japanese were advancing, the Allies were trying to stop the inevitable, and the RAF was sending its pilots on missions that were, in practice, statistical death sentences. This was a long-range reconnaissance mission. No escort, fuel calculated down to the last drop. No real chance of rescue in case of engine failure. The pilot was an ace, a veteran, experienced, respected. He'd already survived combat that others hadn't. But that morning, something was different. The radio crackles, base responds. Then comes the phrase that would enter RAF military archives as one of the strangest in Australian aviation history. "G'day, mate. I'm still here." There was no declared emergency, no panic, no call for help. The phrase made no technical sense whatsoever. It was almost existential. Seconds later, signal lost, final position recorded, absolute ocean. No downed aircraft was reported, no explosion was seen, no vessel found any trace. The pilot simply vanished from the map of reality. And here the mystery is born. How does an experienced ace disappear without combat, without wreckage, and without explanation, leaving only a phrase that sounds more like a philosophical farewell than a military report? The pilot wasn't a rookie. He wasn't just another name lost in the war records. He was known among RAF squadrons as a man far too calm for such violent times. While others screamed over the radio, he spoke quietly. While others made jokes about death, he wrote long letters home. He'd accumulated enough aerial victories to be considered an ace, but he never liked that title. In one of his last letters to his family, he wrote, "In the sky, there are no heroes, only temporary survivors." Squadron mates reported that he had the strange habit of, before each mission, staring fixedly at the horizon for a few seconds, as if he were saying goodbye to something invisible. In the week before his disappearance, he asked to switch shifts. He told the commander he had a feeling that the next mission would be different. He didn't explain why. He wasn't ill. There was no psychological report. But for the first time in the entire war, he asked to fly alone. When they analyzed the last transmission months later, a radio operator made a comment that remained in RAF internal files. He wasn't talking to base. It seemed like he was talking to himself. "G'day, mate. I'm still here." It didn't sound like a report. It sounded like someone checking their own existence, as if he were trying to make sure he was still real before crossing through something that couldn't be described. Now, here's something that sends chills down your spine. 3 days before the flight, he handed a sealed envelope to another pilot. He said, "If I don't come back, give this to my wife." The other pilot laughed it off, said, "Mate, you've said that before, you always come back." The ace just smiled and replied, "Yeah, but this time feels different, doesn't it?" That envelope was never opened by military command. It went straight to his widow. The contents were never made public, but according to family testimony decades later, the letter didn't read like a standard goodbye. It read like someone who knew they were about to experience something beyond normal comprehension. One line allegedly said, "If you're reading this, I've gone somewhere maps don't show." The family thought it was poetic. Looking back now, it sounds like prophecy. The flight path that day was marked on military maps as a standard reconnaissance mission. In practice, it was one of the most feared routes in the entire Pacific Theater. Pilots quietly called it the Silent Corridor. The aircraft took off from the northeast coast of Australia, heading toward the Coral Sea, into a stretch of ocean where there were no islands, no Allied ships, no commercial routes, just water, thousands upon thousands of kilometers of nothing. If something went wrong, no one would see it, no one would hear it, no one would find it. Internal RAF documents, declassified decades later, revealed something disturbing. In that same airspace, between 1941 and 1943, 18 aircraft disappeared without confirmed wreckage. 11 never had an official cause registered. 6 were classified as lost without trace. The Coral Sea wasn't just a battlefield, it was an evidence eraser. The ACE's last radar point was marked in a quadrant known for sudden electrical storms, magnetic failures, and anomalous radio interference. Operators from that era reported that in that specific region, compasses would spin on their own, signals would vanish without explanation, transmissions would arrive delayed or distorted. It was as if the sky had its own noise. At the exact moment of the last phrase, "G'day mate, I'm still here," other operators picked up a second noise on the frequency. It wasn't common static, it sounded like another voice underneath, unintelligible, like a whisper inside the hiss. The recording was filed as atmospheric interference, but the operator on duty wrote in the report, "It sounded like someone was answering him. Here's where it gets even stranger. 2 civilian fishing vessels were operating roughly 40 nautical miles from the pilot's last known position. Both reported the same thing independently, without knowing about each other's testimony. At approximately the time the ACE would have been overhead, both crews saw what they described as a bright green flash in the sky, not like lightning, more like a camera flash, but huge, covering maybe a quarter of the horizon. It lasted only a second or two, then nothing, no sound, no explosion, just the flash and silence. When military investigators interviewed them separately, both crews used the exact same phrase to describe the color. "It was the green you see right before you pass out." That detail was buried in appendix files and never made it into the official report. Why? Because there's no meteorological or military explanation for a silent green flash that doesn't leave evidence. When the pilot didn't return, protocol was activated immediately. First 24 hours, silence. Second 24 hours, concern. Third day, large-scale search operation. For 12 consecutive days, the RAF mobilized 9 maritime patrol aircraft, 4 Allied ships, dozens of hours of aerial and naval sweeps. They tracked more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean. The result? Nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no life jacket, no piece of metal. It was statistically impossible. Even in crashes from 3,000 meters altitude, something always floats. But here, the sea remained untouched. One of the search commanders wrote an internal memo that remained classified for decades. The total absence of evidence suggests not a common accident, but a complete removal of the object from the observable area. The phrase was considered inappropriate for technical reporting and removed from the official version. When analyzing similar cases in that region, investigators noticed something unsettling. Whenever there was no wreckage, the last contact was short and calm. There was no emergency call. The aircraft disappeared from radar all at once. No progressive crash, no gradual loss of altitude. It was as if someone had erased the aircraft from the sky. On the 13th day of searches, when the operation was about to be shut down, one of the patrol aircraft reported something over the radio. "I've picked up a weak transmission, same frequency as the missing pilot. It was just a fragment, almost imperceptible, but the operators recorded a partial phrase. Still here, the same expression, the same voice, or just the echo of an old signal wandering through the air. The transmission never repeated, and so the official conclusion was born. Pilot presumed dead in service. No location, no cause, no mortal remains. Just a line in a file. But for many radio operators of the era, the feeling was different. It didn't seem like he had died. It seemed like he had been displaced. Let me paint you a picture of just how thorough this search was. The naval vessels deployed used sonar equipment, the most advanced available in 1942. They mapped the ocean floor in grid patterns. The water in that area ranges from 800 to over 2,000 meters deep. Sonar picked up coral formations, underwater ridges, even a few sunken merchant ships from earlier in the war, but not a single piece of wreckage matching the Ace's aircraft. Not a bolt, not a panel, not a wheel. Search pilots reported something else too. Several of them, independently, mentioned feeling unusually disoriented when flying over the last known position. One pilot's log noted, instruments behaved erratically for approximately 90 seconds, felt a sensation like mild vertigo. Then everything returned to normal. Another wrote, it's like the air is thicker there, hard to describe. These observations were dismissed as stress and fatigue, but the consistency is striking. Without wreckage, without bodies, without recorded impact, the official RAAF investigation ended with the standard phrase, cause undetermined. But behind the scenes, the story was different. Parallel reports, engineers' notes, and testimonies from radio operators revealed that three main theories circulated among military personnel, none ever disclosed to the public. The first theory was extreme magnetic failure. The Coral Sea is near regions with natural electromagnetic anomalies. Under certain conditions, compasses lose reference, instruments conflict with each other, pilots can believe they're climbing when they're actually descending. According to this theory, the pilot could have entered spatial disorientation, lost control in dense clouds, fallen in a vertical dive without time to react. Problem: even in vertical crashes, wreckage always appears. Here, nothing appeared. The second theory was atmospheric interference zone. Military meteorologists raised the hypothesis of a rare combination of electrical storm, atmospheric ionization, and radio wave distortion. This could create what's called total signal blackout. The aircraft would exist, but would be invisible to radars and communications. However, this theory fails to explain the physical disappearance, the complete absence of debris, and especially the repetition of the phrase days later. The third theory was never written down officially. It only appears in the personal diaries of two officers. They informally called it the slip event. The idea was simple and disturbing. The aircraft didn't crash. It didn't explode. It wasn't shot down. It left our field of reality, a kind of momentary space-time failure caused by extreme conditions of atmospheric energy. The pilot would have crossed through something that can't be mapped and continued existing in another state. And this would give new meaning to the phrase, "I'm still here, but not where you are." One of the officers wrote in his diary years later, if he had died, the silence would be absolute, but we had an echo, and echoes don't belong to the dead. Now, before you dismiss this as pure speculation, consider this. In 1943, just 8 months after the Ace's disappearance, the RAAF quietly established what they called the Anomalous Incident Documentation Protocol. It was a classified system for logging unexplained events during Pacific operations. The protocol specifically instructed radio operators and radar technicians to record any instance of signal behavior that defied conventional explanation. Loss of contact, without corresponding mechanical failure, voice transmissions that didn't match known pilot positions, radar returns that appeared and vanished without physical correlation. This protocol remained in effect until 1946 and was declassified only in the early 2000s. Why would the RAF create an entire documentation system for anomalies unless they suspected something beyond standard equipment failure was occurring? The case of the RAF ACE isn't unique. It just became the most well-documented. Throughout the 20th century, military archives from different countries revealed disturbingly similar stories, always with three elements in common: last transmission calm, sudden loss of contact, total absence of wreckage. 1945, an American Navy squadron conducts a training flight. The formation leader transmits, "The ocean looks strange. It doesn't look right." Minutes later, 5 aircraft vanish from radar. No fragments found to this day. Final report: disappearance without determined cause. 1952, a Soviet MiG enters a storm cloud over Siberia. Last phrase captured: the instruments are spinning on their own. Absolute silence, no recorded crash, no official response. The pilot was removed from military records as if he'd never existed. 1943, a British bomber over the North Sea during a night mission. The radio transmits, "We're not where we should be." The aircraft disappears less than 40 kilometers from the coast. The sea was scoured for weeks. Nothing. In all these cases, there's no emergency call, no scream, no explosion, just silent confusion, as if the pilots perceived something strange before the end, but didn't have technical words to describe it. Independent researchers suggest that certain regions of the planet possess magnetic instability, extreme electromagnetic turbulence, and atmospheric phenomena not yet understood. These zones would function as faults in the map of reality, places where technology gets lost, and perhaps occasionally people too. Here's a detail that'll make your skin crawl. In 1998, a recreational pilot flying a small Cessna over the Coral Sea, not far from the ACE's last known position, reported an experience to Australian civil aviation authorities. He was flying in clear conditions, good visibility, when suddenly his GPS went haywire, showing his position jumping between coordinates hundreds of kilometers apart. His compass started spinning. His radio picked up what he described as old-fashioned military chatter, like voices from a different era. The whole event lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then everything snapped back to normal. His GPS showed him exactly where he should be. He landed. He filed a report and was told it was likely equipment malfunction. But here's the thing, his girlfriend was filming the flight from the passenger seat. The footage shows the instruments going mad. It shows his hands steady on the controls. And in the audio, you can faintly hear something that sounds like a voice saying, "I'm still here." The footage was examined by electronics experts who confirmed it hadn't been tampered with. It's been uploaded and deleted from the internet multiple times. Make of that what you will. But let me bring this back to the human element, because that's what makes this story truly haunting. The ace had a wife. Her name was Margaret. She was 26 when he disappeared. After the official presumed dead declaration came through, she refused to hold a funeral. She said, "How can I bury someone when there's nothing to bury? How can I mourn someone when I don't know if they're gone?" For the next 43 years, until her death in 1985, Margaret kept a radio in her kitchen, tuned to the old RAF frequency. It was dead air, of course. The frequency had been decommissioned decades earlier, but she left it on anyway. Neighbors said they'd hear her sometimes, late at night, talking to the static. Her daughter later said, "Mum never believed he died. She believed he was somewhere trying to get back." That's a whole different kind of grief, isn't it? Not the grief of loss, but the grief of unresolved existence. Let's talk about the science for a moment, because this isn't just ghost stories and speculation. There's actual physics that might, and I stress might, offer a framework for understanding these disappearances. In quantum mechanics, there's a concept called quantum superposition, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Now scale that up. Wildly theoretical here, but some physicists have proposed that under extreme electromagnetic conditions, macroscopic objects like aircraft could potentially experience something analogous to superposition. Not in a literal quantum sense, but in terms of existing in a state that's undetectable by conventional means. Think of it like this. Your radio is tuned to FM 101. There are dozens of other stations broadcasting simultaneously, but you can't hear them because you're not tuned to their frequency. What if, under the right or wrong conditions, an aircraft could slip onto a different frequency of reality? Still there, still broadcasting, but no longer detectable by our instruments. Dr. Helen Fairweather, a physicist at the University of Melbourne, has studied electromagnetic anomalies in the Coral Sea region. In a 2015 paper, she noted that the area experiences unusually high levels of atmospheric electrical activity far beyond what standard weather models predict. She wrote, and I'm quoting here, "There are regions of our planet where the electromagnetic environment is so chaotic that our current understanding of physics struggles to model it accurately." Whether such environments could affect matter in ways beyond equipment, malfunction remains an open question, but it would be intellectually dishonest to dismiss the possibility entirely. She didn't mention the RAAF ACE specifically, but the implication was clear. We don't know everything. We're not even close. Consider this timeline. 1942, the ACE vanishes. 1943, the RAF establishes anomaly protocols. 1952, Soviet MiG disappears with similar circumstances. 1998, civilian pilot experiences temporal radio transmission. 2015, physicist confirms electromagnetic anomalies in the exact region. 2023, a commercial airline pilot flying Sydney to Port Moresby filed a confidential report. These reports aren't made public, but they're logged, describing a brief loss of all navigation systems while crossing the Coral Sea. Duration, 90 seconds. Recovery, spontaneous. Explanation, none provided. See the pattern. This isn't ancient history. This is ongoing. Whatever happened to that ace in 1942 is still happening, just rarely, just mysteriously enough that it doesn't make headlines, but consistently enough that it can't be ignored. Now, I want to address the skeptics, because I know what some of you are thinking. This is just coincidence. Equipment fails. Weather is unpredictable. The ocean is huge. Bodies and wreckage get lost. And you're absolutely right. That's the rational explanation. But rationality requires evidence, and the evidence here is absence. Absence of wreckage, absence of bodies, absence of oil slicks, absence of distress, absence of explanation. At some point, the absence itself becomes the evidence. When one aircraft vanishes, it's tragedy. When 18 vanish in the same region with the same characteristics, it's a pattern. When that pattern persists across decades and continents, it's a phenomenon. And phenomena, by definition, demand investigation, not dismissal. The RAAF ACE's story was officially closed in 1943. His name went on a cold list, missing in action. No funeral, no body, no place to be remembered. Just a family waiting for someone who never came home. But decades later, in 2007, something extraordinary happened. The Australian War Memorial in Canberra opened a new exhibition on Pacific theatre operations. Among the artefacts was a reconstructed radio room, identical to the ones used in 1942, and they included an audio recording. It was the actual last transmission. "G'day, mate, I'm still here." They'd preserved it in the archives. When visitors put on the headphones and heard that voice, calm, Australian, human, many reported the same feeling. It doesn't sound like an ending. It sounds like he's waiting for a response. Veterans who visited the exhibition, men in their 80s and 90s who'd flown similar missions, said the same thing. He knew. Somehow he knew. One old bomber pilot, tears in his eyes, said to a museum guide, "We all knew every time we took off that the sky might keep us." But most of us were too scared to say it out loud. He wasn't scared. He just acknowledged it. That phrase, "I'm still here," it's not a goodbye. It's a declaration. Like he was telling the universe, "I exist, no matter what you do to me." That's not the voice of a man about to die. That's the voice of a man refusing to be erased. Margaret, his widow, never got to hear that recording. She died 22 years before it was made public. But her daughter did. She went to the memorial in 2008, put on the headphones, and heard her father's voice for the first time in her life. She was born 3 months after he disappeared. In an interview, she said, "I'd imagined his voice my whole life, but hearing it, actually hearing it, he sounds so present, like he's in the next room." Mum was right. He didn't sound gone. He sounded waiting. The museum staff told her that she could have a copy of the recording, but she declined. She said, "If I take it home, I'll listen to it every day, and I'll never move on. Some ghosts are too real to live with." In 2019, a group of aviation enthusiasts and amateur historians launched a privately funded search expedition. They used modern sonar, underwater drones, and satellite mapping to re-examine the Coral Sea area where the Ace was last tracked. They spent 3 weeks scanning the ocean floor. They found 7 shipwrecks, none from World War II. They found geological formations. They found absolutely nothing related to the missing aircraft. One of the expedition leaders said in an interview, "It's almost like it was never there. And I don't mean we couldn't find it. I mean, the ocean floor shows no sign of impact, no debris field, no disturbance. It's pristine, like nothing ever fell there." Which brings us back to the question, did anything actually fall? Here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. If the pilot died, we'd have closure. Tragic, but complete. If the aircraft crashed, we'd have physics. Understandable, but what we have is neither. We have a voice, a presence, a signal, and then nothing. Not the nothing of death. The nothing of absence, and absence is so much more unsettling than death, because death has rules. Absence doesn't. Death is final. Absence is unresolved. It's the difference between a door closing and a door vanishing. You can accept a closed door, but a door that was there and now isn't, with no wall, no frame, no evidence it ever existed, that breaks your brain. That's what happened to the Ace. He didn't walk through a door. The door took him and disappeared. Let me share one final detail, and then I'll let you draw your own conclusions. In 2022, the Australian government declassified a batch of World War II intelligence files. Buried in there was a single-page document dated August 1942, 3 months after the Ace's disappearance. It's a transcript of a conversation between 2 RAF intelligence officers. The document is partially redacted, but here's what's readable. Officer 1 says, "Have you listened to the Coral Sea tapes again?" Officer 2 responds, "Yeah, I have. There's something we missed," Officer 1 asks. "What?" Officer 2 says, "Listen to the silence after he says, 'I'm still here.' It's not empty. And then the document is redacted for 2 lines. It picks up again with Officer 1 saying, 'Christ, you're right. That's not interference, and redacted again." The document ends there. No follow-up, no explanation, just 2 officers realizing something that was deemed too sensitive to ever write down. So here we are, 82 years later. A pilot took off one morning in 1942 and never landed. He left behind a wife who waited 43 years, a daughter who never knew his face, a voice on a frequency that shouldn't still echo but somehow does, and a mystery that every rational explanation fails to solve. Did he die? Almost certainly. Did he crash? Probably. But where? How? Why no evidence? And why, decades later, do people still report strange experiences in that exact stretch of sky and sea? Why do compasses still spin? Why do radios still crackle with voices that shouldn't be there? Why does the ocean floor show no scars? Maybe the most terrifying thing isn't disappearing. Maybe it's continuing to exist without anyone being able to find you. Imagine that. You're still conscious, still aware, still broadcasting, but you've slipped through a crack in the world, and no matter how loud you call, no one can hear you. Except maybe, just maybe, once every few decades, when conditions align, your voice breaks through for a second or two. Still here, I'm still here. And then silence again. That's not death. That's something worse. That's eternal isolation. That's being erased from existence while still existing. And if that's what happened, if that's even possible, then the ace isn't a ghost. He's not a memory. He's still out there somewhere on a frequency we've lost the ability to tune into, saying the same thing he said in 1942. "G'day, mate, I'm still here." The RAF ace's story reminds us of something unsettling. Not every disappearance is a fall. Not every silence is death, and perhaps not every sky is entirely ours. There are places where the rules bend, where technology fails, where men vanish, and no amount of science, investigation, or time gives us answers. Just more questions, better questions, deeper questions, questions that maybe we're not supposed to answer. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that the universe is stranger, bigger, and more unknowable than we'll ever comprehend. And sometimes, in the middle of all that strangeness, a man's voice cuts through. Calm, Australian, human. I'm still here. And that voice, whether you believe it's a ghost, an echo, a quantum anomaly, or just the wind playing tricks, that voice refuses to be forgotten. Because as long as we tell this story, as long as we wonder what happened, the ace gets what he wanted. To still be here, in our minds, in our questions, in our refusal to let him be erased. And maybe that's the only kind of immortality any of us can hope for, to be remembered, to be wondered about, to still matter long after we've gone. G'day, mate. Wherever you are, we're still listening.